Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Sarah Gustafson with Janice Mitchell Real Estate, and we are here for our monthly's ladies' night. And I am so excited this week because we have Kelsey Leblanc with us from Ascend Behavioral Consulting. And I brought her in this month because I know so many of you who have children have been going through so many changes over the past 15 months. And I actually had the privilege of meeting Kelsey at another event. And I immediately just thought, oh my gosh, I have to bring this to my sphere to let you guys hear what she does and what she's been working on to help parents and children adjust to these changing times that I know have been so challenging for so many of you. So with that, Kelsey, I'm going to let you go ahead and take over. The screen is ready for you to share,
Great.
and
Thank you so
we'll
much.
let you go to it. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I was just talking to Sarah and telling her what a great idea this is and how much I appreciate being able to be a part of it and share some information and hopefully give you guys some helpful thoughts and tips as we go through tonight. So let me see if I can share my screen here. All right. Here, actually, let me put it in presenter view.
It takes us all a hot second. I
I
know
know,
I'm
I'm
still doing
sorry.
it
I'm not
too.
actually, I don't actually usually use Zoom for my stuff. So
Oh,
it
which do
takes
you
me a
use?
second to get acclimated. I've been using Google Meets. It's just so much easier to sync
Yeah,
with
they
my
have a great
calendar and
platform too.
send events, send meetings and things like that. All right. Can you see this?
Okay. Yes, we can.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay. So again, my name is Kelsey LeBlanc. I'm the owner and founder of Ascend Behavioral Consulting. So I'm a board certified behavior analyst, licensed applied behavior analyst, and special educator. So I'll get into a little bit about all the letters and all the acronyms as we go along here. So just a little bit about my background so you can get a sense of where I came from. I started my career in public schools. So I started out as a special education teacher. I did a year in middle school, working with kids with significant cognitive and physical challenges. And then I did a handful of years in elementary school, K-3, working in a substantially separate program for children with autism. I went along to become an inclusion facilitator. So again, also in public school, working as a case manager for kids with special needs across a range and variety of diagnoses who were in the inclusion program. So helping them access the academics, helping them access all their services in an inclusive environment. I became a board certified behavior analyst and continued to work in public schools in both types of programs for a period of time. So I worked in a substantially separate program for kids with autism and also in inclusion programs across a handful of schools. After that, I moved to a private company doing applied behavior analysis. So I was a board certified behavior analyst consultant. I worked with a lot of families in homes, did a lot of work with early intervention age kids, birth to 3. So typically about 1.5 to 3 years old, mostly with diagnosis of autism. I was also the director of professional development and training for the company that I was working at. So I spent a lot of time onboarding all of our new staff, training them, doing all of the ongoing training and education for all of our behavior analysts and consultants for the company. Since then, I have opened my private practice. So brings us to where we are now. So just kind of getting my footing under me. I started my company a few years ago, kind of as on the side, and have been expanding recently. So that's been my big focus. All right, so jumping into the fun stuff, what is applied behavior analysis? Most people have no idea what this is. They have not heard of it unless they do have a child with an autism diagnosis who's receiving these types of services. So ABA is the acronym, and it's really just the science of behavior. So using behavioral principles to create meaningful changes in socially significant behavior. So things that people need every day, communication, behavior, self-help skills, things like that. So it's evidence-based practice. It's all based in research. using data-driven decision-making is a big piece of it. And it's traditionally recognized as a treatment for autism, and it is very effective for that purpose. There's a lot of great work being done with individuals with special needs across the board, but specifically with autism. The exciting part for me is that it can really be effective for everyone, for anyone. So the technology and the methodology will work regardless of whether or not you have a diagnosis, you have some differing need, or you're typically developing adult or child. Even if you're aware of it, the technology can still work. My husband used to joke early on, he's like, are you using your behavior analysis on me? And I'm like, you could know it and it would still work. It doesn't matter. So it's exciting. It can be accessed in a lot of broader contexts. So my mission, the goal of my company, is to make ABA both understandable and accessible to anyone who would benefit from a behavioral approach to treatment, regardless of diagnosis. So traditionally, people have only been able to access ABA within the schools or within the home setting with insurance-based services. But you need that ASD diagnosis, otherwise you're not able to access it. So I'm trying to offer this type of service to people that might not otherwise be able to get it through insurance. So my typical clients are most often parents. I'm working with a lot of parents of typically developing children who are just looking for support across regular developmental areas, things that are challenging for us as parents of young kids. So I get a lot of inquiries around sleep, which I will talk about later in my presentation, around early learning skills, how to promote language and communication and social skills for young children, and self-help. So I do a lot of work with toileting, feeding, getting dressed, things like that. Some of my other clients do have an autism diagnosis. So what's a little bit different about my service, I don't provide comprehensive treatment. So in that sort of traditional model of ABA, many of our children with ASD are requiring a high number of hours of service to get that significant impact that they're looking for from treatment. And as a solo practitioner, I cannot, provide 20 to 30 hours of direct service to one client within the week. But what I can do is provide support to parents through a consultation and parent training model if they're not able to access those services. So what is a really big challenge right now for families of individuals with autism is that the wait lists for comprehensive services are incredibly long. So actually, Massachusetts is one of the most dense areas of the country for ABA services, behavior analysts, behavior technicians, the staff that work under them. And even so, a lot of the wait lists right now are over a year and a half to access services. And, Sarah and I were just chatting a little bit before this about, some of those developmental windows, especially when you're talking about early intervention, the amount of brain development that happens before age 3 is incredible. And it's something that we want to take advantage of. So for these families that then all of a sudden are told that their 2-year-old can't access services for a year and a half, it's really stressful. And it's frustrating, and you don't know how you're going to support your child in the way that you want to. So for these families, like I said, consultation and parent training. How can we kind of look at your biggest areas of concern, your highest priorities, and tackle them one at a time? So there's many different ways. I completely individualize my service depending on what the family needs, what their personal time constraints are, their financial constraints. I try to work with them to create some sort of plan that will meet their needs and help them support their child at home. And this is a great way, the parent training model, which I'll also talk about a little bit later, you're the person that tends to be with your child the most. So to be able to have those skills yourself that you can implement on weekends, in the evenings, in the morning, to support your child when you're at home is really important. I work with individuals with other diagnoses. So in the past, individuals, children with ADHD, kids with anxiety, depression, OCD. In some of these cases, I would be co-treating with other providers, and I'm always happy to collaborate and co-treat as needed. I obviously have my area of specialization, and there's certainly parts that I would not call myself an expert, but ABA can be really beneficial when co-treating with other areas. And I have a lot of clients that don't have a diagnosis, but they're just experiencing significant levels of challenging behavior. So whether that be at home, tantrums, sometimes at school. I'll talk about school-based services a little bit going forward as well. So the services I provide, I talked a little bit about that, but so consultation. So this may start in any number of ways. Some parents are looking for, a single consultation. They just have questions. I have some information that I'm trying to access, and I need somebody to talk to me about my school program, or to talk to me about thoughts about home programming, or direction, or things like that. So I do single consultations. Sometimes I'll do quick consultations on sleep, things like that, try to answer questions for people in a quicker way. My sort of biggest area is parent training. So this is a really targeted approach for a specific need. So if you are struggling with sleep, or tantrums, or rigidity, or transitions, your child doesn't transition well. So different things like that. We'll start with an assessment. It's just an interview-based assessment. All of my services currently are telehealth. So as we've been going through the pandemic, working with families, this model lends itself nicely to that, because we can do interviews, and I can train parents remotely, and they can implement at home, and I can support them in that. So we do that assessment. We co-develop a treatment plan. This is a hugely important part of the process, and this is where, again, where my approach differs a little bit, maybe from a traditional approach. In a traditional model, the BCBA will do the assessment, and then they will plan the treatment, which would then be implemented by a behavior tech, so somebody directly working with your child. So it makes sense that the behavior analyst is really sort of in charge of the process. Because I'm working with parents, and working with families, and working within that family structure, that home environment, it's incredibly important that parents are a major part of the planning process. Not only do they have to agree with what they're doing, they have to be 100% on board. It has to be something they like. If I were to hand you a perfect clinical plan that you can't or don't want to implement, you won't. Right. And it won't work. So a huge piece of it is making sure that, you're on board, you've had a hand in creating this plan. I'm certainly guiding and directing, making sure that all the principles are sound, that we're, doing all the things that need to be done to sort of get you where you need to be. But there's not one way to do it. That's sort of the beauty of it. I can help you, tailor a really individualized plan that works for your family, takes into account the other things you have going on in your life, in your home, your other children, your other responsibilities. How can we make this work for you? So that co-treatment planning process is really key, and it takes a good amount of time to make sure that I understand what you're looking for, and you're able to develop with me. Behavioral skills training. So this is the part of me kind of teaching you how to implement what we're doing, making sure that the parent is comfortable actually doing what we've talked about. And then ongoing consultation and support. So this looks different every single time. Some families, we create a plan, I support them for a couple days in succession right at the very beginning, and then they say, we're good. Our questions have been, we are comfortable, we can run with this, we're ready to roll. And I tell them, great, do it. Call me if you need me. Email me with questions. I'm happy to, answer those questions, and do the back and forth as things need kind of minor adjustments and minor tweaks. Obviously, any bigger changes, we might need bigger conversations, but sometimes they're ready to run with it, and it's very clear. Other times, some families really are looking for a little more, hands-on support. They are unsure in general, they just are, maybe parents that like a higher level of support, and that's fine. And so maybe we, meet daily, via Zoom, for a week, and then we move to a once a week, and, kind of slowly fade out like that. Or we can do once a week or twice a week ongoing. It really depends. I tried to tell families up front as we're planning for this, the only part that I can really plan for is we'll do the assessment, we'll co-develop a treatment plan, we'll train for it, and then we'll reassess. What do you need? How can I help you? How can I make you feel comfortable? And of course, there's, ongoing data collection that helps us, know where we are, and for me to provide the support when I'm not there. I do educational support as well. So for families of children on IEPs, individualized education plans in public school, if they have special needs and they're trying to navigate that process. I am not an advocate. That is sort of its own role. But for families that really are working within the ABA context in public school, sometimes they're looking for sort of a neutral third party to interpret assessment results. Was this done at the level of quality that it should be? Do you agree with the results and the interpretation? Sometimes it's, does my child have an appropriate program at school? Can you come in and observe and see if their programming is what you would recommend? And sometimes parents are just looking for someone to provide another voice in meetings. Sometimes they don't feel comfortable talking the lingo, which is very understandable. I know, having been on the public school side of it, myself, I at least would try not to be jargony, but there's a lot of jargon. And sometimes it can be easy to sort of kind of blow past certain things that may need more explaining. So it can be helpful to have somebody in the meeting who can sort of interpret, who can explain things, and who can also speak on your behalf. Obviously, with the intention that you want behind it. But sometimes it's a little easier for me to advocate in a way that is clearer for the parent. And so they look for that type of support. Last here, we have private assessment. So this is functional behavior assessment. And I know I did the whole presentation with Sarah in a previous meeting about FBA is a big one. A lot of people are not familiar with this type of assessment, and it's something that sometimes is available and offered in public schools and sometimes is not. It's sort of the gold standard of behavioral assessment, but is not entirely widespread at this point. So this is basically, if you have a child who is demonstrating usually significant challenging behavior. It can be interfering behavior. So from a parent perspective, there's something that's interfering with my child's learning, and I'm not sure why. So they're really inattentive. They're not listening to the teacher. They're staring out the window. They're engaging with small items, things that are going on in the environment that are interrupting their learning. And so we can look at the function behind that. I usually get calls when there's major challenging behavior. So we have a child that is leaving the classroom without permission. We have a child that is engaging in property destruction, breaking things in the classroom, throwing things, engaging in aggression towards other students, anything. We can go up to, some very dangerous behaviors sometimes in the public school environment, which is very challenging when you have lots of kids and it's sort of a vulnerable situation. So I would be called in this case by the family to do a private assessment. And so basically we would be looking at what is the function of this behavior? Why is it happening? What is the child trying to access? Are they trying to escape something? Are they accessing attention from an adult or from peers? Are they accessing other types of activities? Because when they engage in this behavior, they get to leave the classroom. So there's different things that we're looking at, sort of the why. Why are they engaging in this behavior? And that can be really helpful in creating a targeted behavior support plan. So once we understand why this is happening, we can basically manipulate the environment, manipulate the circumstances so that the child can access what they need in a different way. And then also, so we're trying to sort of increase adaptive skills and decrease challenging behavior at the same time. How do I get the child to get what they need, but not by engaging in this behavior? And then also, to engage in the environment appropriately. How do we get them learning in their environment? So that is FBA. I'm curious if anyone's ever heard of it. I get very interesting responses when I speak to parents, even parents who have, been in and around the special education system for quite a while, have not heard of it and have not been offered FBAs in certain circumstances where they may be beneficial. So I love sort of sharing that this technology exists and, for parents that, might benefit from having a private assessment, or even just for asking the schools. Again, parents, if they don't know to ask, sometimes the schools will provide them at no cost to the parent. So it's something that can be really helpful. So services for organizations, that same functional behavior assessment, sometimes I'm contracted in by the schools, the school districts, to complete those assessments for their students. Either if they don't have staff on hand that know how to implement those types of assessments themselves, or if their staff are overloaded, they just don't have time in their schedule to put in the amount of time the assessment takes. And then also professional development workshops. I'm not going to dwell on that, but I do sometimes do professional development for school districts or childcare centers, things like that. All right, so what I decided I was going to talk about today is sleep assessment and treatment. So I'm hoping this is relevant to somebody out there. I imagine somebody is not sleeping very well or knows someone who's not sleeping very well. I find this has actually been the most requested area of need as of late. I have many families that I'm working with to help their children sleep better and then subsequently help the parents sleep better. I do think that, to some extent, this has been influenced by the pandemic. I do have some stats here that this is not new because of the pandemic, but I do think, everybody is stretched so thin. Everybody, has been somewhat burnt out by this experience, I think. And so I think it has become more immediate. Parents are, I really, maybe I was managing before I could live with, getting up a couple times a night. And now all of a sudden, everything has changed. My kids are having a harder time. I'm more exhausted. I can't handle not sleeping, right? Because my kids aren't sleeping well. So, and I've had a lot of inquiries that, people are just sort of at the end of their ropes. They need better sleep to be able to cope with the circumstances right now. And I think also as things are changing further, as we're hopefully moving out of the pandemic, I think it's just sort of a whole new set of transitions for families. So while it may seem amazing, and it is, and I'm very glad, I'll be very happy when this is over, I think this is a really challenging hurdle for a lot of families, for parents and kids, to try to figure out how to adjust to the new normal and what that looks like. So a little bit again about sleep. Believe it or not, pre-pandemic, 20 to 30% of children have significant sleep challenges. So that's, a third of kids are struggling with sleep. And then behavioral sleep problems are found across all age groups. So I just specifically put infants and toddlers because that typically is the age group that I work with. But night wakings are the most common, as I'm sure you can imagine, with 25 to 50% of children over 6 months still awakening during the night. And that's a huge number. Half of all kids are not sleeping through the night at 6 months. And generally, unless there are health issues at play or other circumstances, most babies are capable of sleeping through the night by 5 to 6 months. For the most part. So when you think that, probably almost 50%, up to 50% of babies at that point are not, that's a long time for parents to be waking. It's a very long time. I have parents that tell me that they have a couple kids, up to 5 or 6 or 7 years old, and they're still not sleeping through the night. And so they've been, they haven't slept through the night in 7 years, 8 years. It's a very long time to be sleep deprived, and sleep obviously plays a huge role in our ability to function, to have good health, and obviously all of our life is really governed by our sleep. And then bedtime resistance. This is always fun. 10 to 15% of toddlers. It's fun times. I was actually talking to a client today about some of the, we've kind of gotten through some of the bigger bedtime resistance issues, and we were now coming into the very cute ones where they realize that, the big stuff doesn't work. The crying, the screaming, the yelling, it doesn't work. But what about, mommy, I have something to tell you. I need to tell you one more thing. And then when you come in and they say, I just love you. And you're like, oh my God, I love it. It's so cute. But they come up with these very creative ways to resist bedtime. So one thing that I find really fascinating and upsetting, I guess might be a good word. There's a study done. This is quite a few years ago now, but I can't imagine that the results are very different today. That 81% of visits to family pediatricians, psychiatrists, for children with sleep difficulties resulted in a prescription for medication. And I hear this all the time. I hear it from families who seek my support because their pediatrician said, just give your kid melatonin or just put them on this medication. I've seen it from, people whose family members tell them that, oh, melatonin's great, I just give it to my kid. And I'm not somebody, believe me, who would say that medication is across the board bad. I think there is a place for medication. I think it is valuable and important for people in situations that need it. But the studies also clearly demonstrate that in most cases, um, there are behavioral causes and behavioral solutions to these sleep issues. So it's very frustrating to hear that people are just medicating their children, either because they're at the end of their rope and this is what's available to them. This is what someone that's trusted is telling them to do. Um, or they don't really know what their other options are. They're sort of at the end of their rope is usually when people are starting to seek these options. But there's other choices. So one thing that I did want to kind of throw in here, if anybody listening has worked with a sleep consultant or a sleep coach before, or in this case might be recommended to them, seek out a sleep study, seek out a sleep coach. Your pediatrician might tell you that. And one thing that's important to know is that there aren't actually any regulatory bodies in the US that oversee sleep coaches or sleep consultants. So, I've done quite a bit of research on this just with my own personal interest in this area and my own practice in this area. Just wondering if there's sort of anything else that would, I guess, make my training more complete. If I were to become a certified sleep coach. And what I found is those certifications are really not, like I said, they're not overseen by anyone. They tend to be a huge range. Sometimes it's a 3-day course to become a sleep consultant. Sometimes it's 90 hours over a course of a couple months, and there's some supervision or a test. And it really is just independent people that have created these course sequences to become a certified sleep consultant of their making, right? So you want to be careful if you are seeking out someone for support. You do your research, figure out what their credentials are, figure out what their background is. So some sleep consultants or sleep coaches might be healthcare professionals with advanced training in behavioral or pediatric sleep medicine. So that's where I find that I would fall, right? I am considered to be a healthcare professional. I have advanced behavioral training, and I have done a lot of additional training in sleep. So that's kind of where I would fall under this. Sometimes, like I said, it might be someone who's taken an online course, or it might be someone who decided to call themselves a sleep consultant, right? You don't need anything formal to say that. And sometimes people just use their personal experience. They've, had several children. They've helped many of their friends and family sleep train their children. And that's sort of the level of expertise that they're working with. So you just want to be careful as you're seeking out that type of support. All right, so my approach to managing sleep challenges, again, I start with assessment. So it's the same thing we start with, tends to be a 90-minute to 2-hour interview-based assessment where I learn all about what is going on with sleep. So what challenges are you seeing? We talk about what the environment looks like. We talk about, how parents are responding, how kids are responding. What is the temperature like in the child's? There's a lot of pieces to the biological side of sleep that we also want to touch upon in addition to the behavioral side of sleep. So it's kind of a two-pronged thing. We set goals. So we figure out, what do you want? And these tend to be pretty straightforward, right? I want to sleep through the night. I want my child to not wake me up or not wake up themselves, right? I want them to sleep through the night. That's a very common goal. Another goal I get is, I just want to be able to put my child to bed at night and have them go to sleep quickly and by themselves, right? I talk to a lot of parents that spend 2 hours with their child trying to get them to fall asleep, often unsuccessfully, until they finally give up and sleep in their kid's bed or on the floor next to the bed or, things like that. So getting them to fall asleep on their own. I do also get inquiries about early waking. So actually, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. But kids that are very, very early risers, 4 o'clock, 4:15, and parents that are like, I just can't start my day at 4 o'clock. It's just not not livable. So we set goals. I'd like my child to sleep until, of course, we want reasonable goals, but 5:30, 6 a.m. Maybe this child's not gonna be sleeping till 9, but we can get you to, maybe 6 o'clock is a reasonable starting goal. So we co-develop a treatment plan. So like I talked about before, this is very much individualized. What is going to work for you? What's going to work for your family? What's going to work within the context of your normal routines, the time that you have? There's a lot that goes into this, but it is very adult driven. I generally will recommend or present several options. And once we get to like the true like intervention piece of it, I'll present them with several options that I think would work. And do any of these sound good to you, right? Does any of these sound like something you could do, something that you like? It's people have very particular opinions about sleep and what they're willing to do and how they're willing to interact with their child around it. And that's really important. So I try to make sure that there's something that they feel very comfortable with, and then we tailor it from there. It's very, very individualized. After that, like I said, we go through the treatment plan. I write it all up formally, make sure it's very clear on paper. They know exactly what to do. We train. I want everything to be 100% clear, because often when we're doing the sort of the nighttime piece of it, if we're talking about night wakings, you're exhausted, right? This is probably the time that you are least capable of making decisions, trying to figure out how to respond. So my goal is for you to know exactly what the plan is, exactly what you're going to do, and feel strongly enough about it that you're going to follow through. You're actually going to do it. And also that you can do it like a zombie, right? I'm assuming that you're very tired when you're implementing this plan. And so I want it to be so clear in your mind that you're not making decisions. You're not, what do I have to do now? I don't know what, in this case, my child did this, what do I do? I want it to be really clear so that you can power your way through it at 3 o'clock in the morning when we're doing this. Because it's challenging. I tell a lot of families, in many cases, it's simple. The solution isn't always complex. It's hard. It's simple, but it's very challenging to do. And that's where people get tripped up. But I think once they sort of know that they're on the right track, if they feel confident that this is how I'm going to get the results that I want within a couple nights or within a week or within 2 weeks, depending on the issue that we're working with. Sometimes it's solved within a night. Sometimes it's solved within 2 nights. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 weeks. It depends on sort of the level that we're looking at and the intervention that we choose. We do some baseline data collection. So I do ask parents to take a certain amount of information before we start so that we have a basis for comparison, right? This is what we were seeing before. And now that we're in treatment, these are the numbers that we're seeing. And it's really important to me that I am making this as simple and as minimally effortful on the parent's part as possible. I am not trying to add more work to your day. That is not helping anyone. So try to keep it as simple and straightforward as possible. And I rarely ever get complaints on this piece. I think people are very happy to sort of see it in writing. It really helps them, they kind of record and then they can really explain to me what's going on and kind of see the numbers. And I also end up graphing it down the road and they can see their progress visually, which can be really helpful when if we are hitting a roadblock at some point or, they're feeling like things are maybe slower than they were hoping, you can really see it visually. It's very clear. We're making progress. We're on the right track. Power through. You can do it. And a big part of it is kind of coaching them through that. It's, again, you're tired. And I totally get that. And I appreciate it. All right. So a big piece, as I think I mentioned a little bit before about my approach to sleep training or sleep treatment, I guess I should say, we're not always sort of training in the traditional sense, is daily support, at least for the first 3 days of treatment. So again, once the parents feel 100%, they know exactly what to do. I can pretty much promise, I can guarantee you that after night 1 or day 1 or whenever we're doing this naps, you will have questions. Kids are very adept at responding to us. They change their behavior as soon as we change ours. So as soon as you do something different, I can give you sort of empirically what to expect, over a period of time, but there is no way for me to predict exactly how your individual child is going to respond when you change the rules, right? You're changing the rules on them. This is how we always used to do it. This is how I like to fall asleep. And now all of a sudden, my parent or caregiver or whoever's putting me to bed is changing it up, and I don't like it. And so, regardless of what that looks like, generally they're going to do something you don't expect, right? And so that next day, I always get questions, right? This is what happened. How do I respond to this? Did I do this right? And so it's really important for me to answer those questions as quickly as possible, right? I don't want you to move into another night not knowing what to do or worrying that you are doing it wrong. So we make adjustments quickly. So we plan ahead of time. We have these, they're usually 20 to 30 minute check-ins, I would say on average. And they're every day, at least for the first 3 days. And after that, I'd say within 3 to 5 days, typically it evens out, right? Your child has now experienced you doing this a couple times, you've experienced their adjustments, and you sort of get to a place where it's predictable or more predictable. And then after that, like I said, it kind of depends on the family. Are they someone that needs that higher level of support? They want to continue, and we'll continue. And I plan my caseload so that I can add in that daily time if it's needed. I don't want to say, oh, I'm totally full. The next day, we have to skip until the following day. I plan it so that we can do it in real time. Let's see. Like I said, after that, it's ongoing case by case. Some families want to continue as they are and, do a follow-up at 1 week, or they don't want to follow up with me at all. Sometimes that's the case, and that's fine. They've got it. They're good. But most often we'll at least do a week follow-up. If not, let's give it 2 or 3 days and then we'll check in, is often the case. And then continued data collection and analysis. So this is something that, most of the time, as I mentioned, if we're doing that 1 week follow-up and a couple of subsequent follow-ups to make sure that we're reaching our goals, the parents will continue to take data so that they can, they send it over to me, I graph it, and we make sure we're still making progress. Obviously, anecdotally, they tend to know at that point. They're like, this is totally different. My life has changed. I get people all the time that after, even a couple days, they're like, you saved my life. I don't know how I functioned before. And, suddenly I feel like a whole new person. I slept through the night for the first time, like I said, in years. I feel like a totally different person. And so they usually know, but I like to keep track from a practice standpoint. Any questions so far, ladies? I know it's a small group here. We're mostly recording.
No, I think it's just fascinating to me that you're able to help people. Every time you speak and I listen to you, I learn something new. And I just think it gives people a practical way of being able to handle things when they are very overwhelmed. Because I've had many friends throughout the course of my life that have had children and go through these periods, and
Yeah.
you see the look on their faces and it's like, oh my God, how can I help you? And I don't know what to do. And just being able to have a resource like you to reach out to, like you said, for some people, they might just be able to course correct a few things and they're on their way,
Yeah.
but they just needed someone from the outside looking in to say, here's what you need to course correct.
Yeah. Or to
So,
validate that. I think people
yes,
question themselves very often if they're not
absolutely.
sure. Rightfully so. I mean, I can say even from my own personal experience with my kids, like I said, when you're exhausted and you're up in the middle of the night with your baby that you don't know why they're crying, it's very easy to question yourself, even when you work and sleep. When you're sleep deprived, your brain works differently. And so it can be, sometimes all you need is that, that assurance from someone that you're on the right track, or this one small tweak. Sometimes that's all it takes.
No, I think that's fascinating. I'm interested to see what you say now with the case studies, because I
Yeah.
think these are where some parents that are watching this might be able to pick up a tip or two that might be able to help them out.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. So I thought this would be fun. These are, again, like I said, this is my current love, is sleep. I have many areas that I love working with, and age groups and different needs. But this has, like I said, been a big focus. And it's really exciting to me because the change is so concrete. So with certain other things, we're looking at change over time, which is important to know, right? Behavior change is not immediate. It does not happen overnight. You can think of any time you've ever tried to change your diet or your exercise routines or your sleep habits or anything like that. Change is hard. Behavior change is difficult and it takes time. With that being said, with sleep, it's pretty quick. So it's exciting for me that I can make these sort of drastic, life-changing shifts for people in sort of this short amount of time, that it has such a big impact. It has an impact on their whole family. It has an impact on their child, and that child's health. I sometimes, you'll see, and I'll talk about this, like huge changes in kids' moods and affect and attention. Their ability to play even can change really drastically. And then for parents, their ability to function really changes. Their relationships with their kids and with each other, and just people's whole lives. It's really changing. So it's fun for me. It's very reinforcing that it can happen in a much sort of shorter time frame usually than other types of behavior change. So this first case study, this was a few years ago now, but is kind of one of my favorite examples of what I do. So the woman who reached out to me had a 10-month-old boy. And so he was unable to fall asleep independently. At this point, she was still nursing, and he needed to be nursed and rocked and sang to in the chair in order to fall asleep. And then she'd wait, and then she'd try to put him down. But if he didn't wait long enough and he's not in that deepest part of his sleep cycle, he'd wake up. And so the bedtime routine, it was hours. She would spend hours every night trying to put her son to sleep, and she was exhausted. She and her husband, had a schedule where he worked nights and she worked days, and they didn't have childcare. So this was just, really overwhelming at this point when you're not sleeping. There were multiple wake ups during the night, every night. So even once she got him back to sleep, this would go on throughout the night. And so they had actually reached out to a sleep consultant around 6 months because they were exhausted and overwhelmed. And that sleep consultant, unfortunately, was not someone highly trained. When I kind of tried to politely ask her impressions of her without, I didn't want any specific information, but I said, how was your experience other than the fact that it didn't work, right? And it made it worse. And she said, honestly, it was the worst money I've ever spent. She asked me a couple questions, then she sent me a cookie cutter plan with my kid's name copied and pasted in it, and told me that I could email her for 2 weeks and she would help. And she wasn't even timely in responding to my questions. And so this person had, recommended that they use the Ferber method, which I'm not sure if anyone has heard of the Ferber method. The kind of the short version of it, it's called graduated extinction. So it's allowing your child to cry for increasing periods of time until they learn to self-soothe. So say the first night, you're starting with, letting them cry for a minute, and then you go in and reinforce, tell them that you're okay, and rub their back and give them a kiss and leave again. And then you wait 2 minutes and then 3 minutes, and you increase the amount of time. And the tricky part about this method, so the data suggests that it works. I've never recommended it. I don't like it. I think behaviorally it doesn't follow the rules, right? So, we're reinforcing longer and longer periods of crying, right? I'm teaching my child that the longer you cry and the more escalated you become, the higher intensity, eventually I'll come back. Right? We almost want to do the opposite of that, right? And so that's what happened in this case. And so for many people, apparently this works. Like I said, I don't use it. I don't recommend it. I've never had anybody ask me to use it, based on that information and the fact that I don't recommend it. But basically, they got into a situation where they had taught their child to cry for extended periods of time. And so now he would cry for hours on end, standing in the crib, engaging in, throwing toys, trying to bang his head against the crib. They had just really escalated and created much more challenging behavior than they started with. So once we started working together, they opted to do an extinction method. So this is kind of your traditional cry it out method, right? And this is a really controversial way to sleep train. A lot of people have incredibly strong feelings on this one. This is usually the one that gives the biggest reaction. So cry it out. You let your baby, you let them cry, and eventually they self-soothe, and they learn that they just don't need to cry. And so this is not for everyone. And I don't recommend this in many cases. It's often not my recommended method, but this is where that kind of individual history comes into place, the assessment, the parent state of mind. The extinction you're cried out is going to be the fastest results. It's very clear. It is going to get you the most bang for your buck the most quickly. It is the hardest to implement, right? Because you are forced to listen to your baby cry. And just wait. So people just sit outside the door. I've had many parents, not when I've been working with them, but I've had other people tell me that, oh, I did the extinction method with my child, and I just sat out there outside their door and cried while they cried, and that's how we got through it. And it's hard. This is a very hard way to sleep train your baby, but for this client, this was the best option, and it was the option that they wanted. And again, I actually use this for my child. Right. I don't disagree with it. The studies show some people are very concerned about trauma, ongoing trauma for your child. And the studies very clearly show that it does not do any damage to your child. Kids cry in a lot of cases for a lot of reasons, and it's not going to hurt them in the long run. And like I said, it's the quickest. It's actually, it's ripping off the Band-Aid, right? In some other methods, it takes longer. And you could argue that, I'd rather have my child cry for 1 or 2 nights than cry for 2 weeks, because I'm in the room, they see me, and I won't pick them up. Right. So there's plenty of arguments, and this is all part of the process of co-planning. It needs to be something that you feel strongly about. And so for this family, they desperately needed results quickly. They had such a poor experience. She's like, I will do whatever it takes to most quickly have my child sleeping. And so that's what we did. And the results were incredible. And this is it's just so exciting to me. Like I said, that these results can be so quick. So within 2 nights, he was sleeping through the night. He was 10 months old. He had never slept through the night. Within 2 nights, sleeping through the night, without crying, within 1 week, 12 hours of uninterrupted sleep per night. She was, and this is when we're talking about, she was like, my entire life is changed. I can't fathom how I lived before. And so with this child, they also saw really significantly improved mood. They would have described him as being a very irritable child before. And he's a sweetheart. He's a lovely kid. He was tired. It's really hard to have a lot asked of you in infancy when you're tired. So they saw really improved mood, improved behavior. He had been challenging. They had been dealing with a lot of, tantrum-like behavior before, and improved attention. He was more engaged with his parents. And so that was a huge, she's like, I feel like this is a different kid. Which was, made her really happy, of course. And then sort of as things snowball, they had significant improvements in the quality of life of the parents, of course. So there had been some marital stress at that point. It's very easy, I'm sure as many of you know, to start getting at each other over little things when you're tired. And it's really hard. And mom also had significant improvements in her emotional state. So she had been dealing with some pretty significant postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. And a big piece of it was lack of sleep. It's very hard to be at your best and coping at your best when you're exhausted. And so she had a huge upswing in her mood and her ability to cope, her flexibility in her daily life and in her work. So it was just kind of all around, really, really life changing. So that was a really fun case. Again, it was so quick. She couldn't believe that, within 2 nights, he was not waking up anymore. He slept straight through the night. Thoughts, questions?
No, I think it's amazing. I went through it with a couple of friends with their kids, and you're right, it is very controversial. And I think that's the thing for anybody to remember with anything that
Yeah.
we talk about is you have to do what's best for you
Yes.
in life. And if it's not best for you, or if what works for you might not work for somebody else. And it's up to each one of us as individuals to make that decision. Yep. So, but it's yeah, I mean, you clearly can show that it works, and I'm interested to see what else we have on deck.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really important. It has to be what you want it to be. I would never recommend that someone implement something they're not comfortable with. Is a huge part of it. And I also, one piece that I do include in my sleep treatment plans, um, just for my own peace of mind, um, I do put in sort of a crisis section. um, so again, God forbid, I mean, anyone at any time could injure themselves, right? I mean, you could trip just walking to your kitchen right now to get a drink of water. But of course, if you were to have a child that were to become more frustrated and, maybe they're just standing up in their crib and they trip and they fall and they hit their head, or, anything could happen, or they could escalate in a way that is unpredictable, right? Kids are not always predictable. There's certain patterns that I can generally predict, or give you an idea of trends that I see. But I never know with any one given child exactly how they will respond. Everyone is different. So I always add in, we talk about reinforcement, we talk about, sort of the things that you want to avoid, so that we're not making it worse, right? God forbid you have to veer from the plan, which I try to make sure there's very clear information on how to veer off if you need to, right? Without reinforcing the behaviors that we're trying to change. But with that being said, I always write, just at the end of the day, don't ever do anything that makes you uncomfortable. If you have reached a point where you are now uncomfortable moving forward, you are uncomfortable, stop. Stop. Nothing is irreparable. Nothing can't be changed. Obviously, we want to be careful. The biggest thing you want to avoid is reinforcing unsafe behavior, right? We don't want to get to a point where a child does something unsafe. We then reinforce it. And now all of a sudden we've taught them how to engage in unsafe behavior to get what they want. That's sort of the thing that we want to avoid more than anything else. But with that being said, I would never advise anyone to do anything that makes them uncomfortable. And there's always going to be caveats, right? There's always going to be, my child, I'm sure they're teething. I know that they don't feel well. We were really off schedule, something happened, and, we came home really late. Life happens, that's all part of it, and nothing's irreparable. It's not going to it may change the course of this in the very short run, but we are planning for that as best we can, and with those constant check-ins, we can adjust. So we can make changes, we can move things. That's sort of my goal, is to never leave you questioning what to do next, unless you decide altogether to stop. And that's within anyone's right as well. I no longer want to sleep train. I'm happy if my kids stay in my bed forever, or I want to wait until they wean themselves if they're nursing, or they'll drop a nap eventually, and that's fine. If it's your life, it's your family. I encourage people to, unless it directly impacts anyone's immediate health, that's certainly when I would, be advising. I don't want anyone's health to be impacted, or their well-being. But certain other things are just family choices, right? There is no one way to live your life, and it is not my place in any way to dictate to you how to run your family. So if you were to change your mind, or decide on something different, I can work within other types of constraints. So families that want to co-sleep but still want to make these changes, or I have parents that want to continue nursing and want to sleep train, and all of those things are manageable. It will change how it looks. It may change the timeline a little bit. It can be a little more tricky in certain cases, but everything's doable. That's part of, I guess, the benefit of working with a behavior analyst, or someone that's highly medically trained and behaviorally trained, is that I can adjust to anything, right? It's not like one bag of tricks that this is within my realm of experience. There's always sort of as long as you have the underlying principles playing in, we can do anything, really. So second case study. This one I actually just wrapped up last week. It was very fun. So this was a 2.5-year-old boy. They were experiencing delayed sleep onset. So it was taking generally at least an hour for him to fall asleep at night. Parents would, lay with him on the floor next to his bed or in his bed. He's in a toddler bed, which makes everything more difficult, obviously, when kids can get out of their own bed if you're not working with a crib. But they had experienced, he had climbed out of the crib and fallen headfirst. So he was in the toddler bed, and so it was hard to get him to fall asleep at night. And he needed a parent to fall asleep with him. Sometimes he was waking through the night. He had recently started sleeping, more consistently. That was, one improvement. But he had previously, when he had been waking during the night, he was a very early riser, as was their older daughter. They said they had they had made peace with knowing they'd never sleep past 5 a.m. again. And that's when both kids were generally waking. But now that the 2.5-year-old was sleeping through the night, he was actually starting to wake for the day around 4:15 every day. So that obviously is a very, very difficult situation to get enough sleep as an adult under those circumstances, and to make sure that he's getting a developmentally appropriate amount of sleep. That is very early to be waking up. So for this case, we had a very multi-layered approach. There's a lot going on here, right? So we started by adjusting the sleep schedule. So obviously, one big piece of it is making sure that the child's getting a developmentally appropriate amount of sleep. So we're looking at nighttime sleep. We're looking at daytime sleep. If they're, under 5, we're at least considering napping. Maybe they're not napping anymore, but that is within the realm of possibility. And we're looking at total sleep. So the recommendations are for total sleep, including naps. So it matters a little less when that sleep happens, but you want to get hit a certain number within each age range to make sure that they're getting enough sleep. So we looked at the sleep schedule. We did some bedtime fading. So one piece, at least at this age, is a little different when you're working with babies or infants. Sometimes you want to be shifting earlier. Sometimes you want to be shifting later. It really depends. There are a lot of factors. But in this case, we were using a bedtime fading. So we were starting later. We're trying to capitalize on what we call sleep pressure. We want them to be tired, right? So especially when we're trying to get them to fall asleep more quickly alone, we want them to be tired. So we start with that later bedtime and fade back. We changed the bedtime routine. So again, because before it included the parents, we made it obviously so that it did not, but you also, a big piece of it, sleep is very ritualized, which I'm sure, many of you can imagine just with your own sleep routines, right? Most people do the same things every night before they go to sleep, even if it's as simple as, brush your teeth, get a glass of water, take out your contacts, like whatever your sleep routine includes, it tends to be exactly the same. And it's the same for kids. They're very ritualized. They're actually more flexible in changing their sleep routines than adults are. It is much harder for an adult who's sort of managing their own sleep routine alone to change it and to follow through with that night after night as you're learning to sleep in a different way. So we changed the bedtime routine so that it looked visually different to the child as well, which actually the funny part was the part that caused the most frustration. Out of this whole process, everything that we did, the part that made the child most upset was that the bedtime routine looked different the first night. They wanted the pillows in a certain spot on the floor, and we moved them, and things moved to a different part of the room, and that didn't fly. So we went with a time-based visiting procedure. So this is sort of the exact opposite, I guess, of the Ferber method. So the Ferber method, oh my goodness, it's 6:15. Oh, wow. I'm gonna talk a lot.
It is. It's okay.
Sorry about that. I was thinking that I would be done so early. Apparently I like talking about this. So we use the time-based visiting method, which is essentially visiting based on time, starting in small increments, but with the goal of avoiding crying and challenging behavior altogether. So you're trying to reinforce by providing attention before the child has an opportunity to get upset. So in this case, we would say, good night, love you, hugs and kisses, tuck you in. I'll be back in a minute to check on you. And the adult literally leaves and comes right back in. Oh, great job staying in your bed. I love you. Let me give you another kiss, tuck you back in. I'm going to leave again. This time I'm going to leave for 10 seconds. 10 seconds, I come back in. Kids usually are very confused by this at first. What are you doing? But they don't have an opportunity to get upset, and it creates trust, right? They know you're not leaving them, you're not going anywhere. You'll always come back. You said you would, and you will, and you do. And then we sort of increase the interval, because a big goal of sleep, or teaching sleep habits, is the child actually needs to be relaxed enough to fall asleep. If we're creating a situation where they are so upset, obviously with the exception of extinction, right? When we're talking babies, they get really tired and they eventually conk out. But with toddlers, it's much more difficult when they have, a higher level of cognition, a higher level of language, and now they're really upset. They don't know why you're doing this. And so trying to make them comfortable enough to relax. And so what you see with this one is they kind of just learn to wait for you in a relaxed state, because they know you're going to come back. And then eventually they fall asleep. And so we increase these intervals over a period of nights until you just say, I'll come check on you in the morning eventually, right? We want to be able to just leave. We did some extinction. So previously they had been having their child come into their bed with them during night wakings or those early morning wakings in the hopes that maybe he'd go back to sleep. So we discontinued that. We put a visual alarm clock into place, so a sun moon clock, because he's, there's a lot of different things out there. They have a lot of them with different colored lights and all these things. For him, we used a sun and a moon because he's, only 2.5. He can't tell time. The color discrimination, it requires a little more thought, right? To know that, if the light's yellow, I can get up. If it's blue, I have to sleep. So we did one with pictures. There's a sun and a moon, and, it's not time to get up until the sun's up. And you can set this alarm clock so that you can pre-program your time for wake up. And then we had to do a lot of teaching around that, and some reinforcement for actually staying in his bed until the sun came up. But it was very cute because he ended up being very excited. He'd be so upset. He couldn't, why can't I leave? Why can't I get up? And then the sun would come up and he'd be like, the sun's up. Look, let's open the windows. Let's get all the stuffies out. And it was, very exciting. So the results of this one, also just great. I mean, the family was fantastic. They did a beautiful job implementing. So by the second night, he slept straight through from 7:45 till 5 a.m. So, he, no wake ups, no 4 o'clock. They didn't have the opportunity for him to fall asleep, on his own without crying, because he actually conked out during story time. He was so tired by the second night. By night 3, he fell asleep alone without any crying and without being upset at all. So they were able to just leave him and let him fall asleep, sleeping straight through the night. And by a 1-week check-in, after those first 3 nights, the family said, we're good. We'll call you if we need you, but let's check in a week. And by that 1-week check-in, he was, again, still falling asleep independently, sleeping through the night. And he had started waking up after 6. So between 6 and 6:30. And so for the parents, they were just beside themselves. They were like, if you told me this 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't have believed you. Dad was all of a sudden very, very hopeful. We had been talking about shifting the sleep cycle, in general, talking about shifting the sleep cycle, but, bringing that bedtime back, fading it back. And their original goal time for wake up was 5:30. And he was like, so what if we kept it at 6:30? Can we do that? We can. It needs to work for your family. If your family can get up at 6:30 and that works for your day, as long as your child's getting a developmentally appropriate amount of sleep, it's not impacting their health, their behavior, anything, there are these factors. And if those things come into play, then, we'll have another conversation. But otherwise, of course, you can have a little bit later bedtime and a little bit later wake time. There's nothing wrong with that. So that was another very exciting one. That was just, there seemed to be a lot of variables, and the family, kind of one of the biggest things that I took with me afterwards is they said that I had sort of unveiled the mystery. They were like, we were so worried. We were so concerned about going through with this. It's stressful. A lot of people have said to me that it was more stressful to decide to work with me than to actually implement. That was the harder part, like wrapping their mind around going through this process. And do I want to do this to my child? People worry that they're hurting their child in the process, and you're not. But he said, once you lifted the veil and sort of explained how everything worked, he said, even before we started implementing, I was seeing it and I was understanding what was happening. And he said, and so then it was actually very easy. It was very easy to go through with it because we knew how it worked and why the things that we had done had sort of put us into the pattern that we had gotten into. And so it was just kind of unveiling the mystery, right? Taking it away, making it just really clear how sleep works, really. And that is it. I managed to talk for almost the whole time. I'm sorry about that.
No, I think it was great, Kelsey. Thank you so much. And I had to laugh at the sun and the moon thing because I have thought for years, and I've always said this because I'm a sleeper. All my clients know this when they come to an appointment with me. I always say I shut my phone off at 9:15 at night because that's when I go to bed, and it goes
Yep.
back on at 7 a.m. because I'm a sleeper. And then I read this book that's like, you should get up at 5:30 in the morning and like start your day and all of this stuff. And I've always believed like if the sun is not out, why am I up? Like, and that just cracked me up because I thinking in my own life, I have my own little sun and moon.
Well,
And I
and
now
that
do
was
get up earlier, and it has been very challenging as an adult to change that kind of sleep pattern.
yeah, it's not easy to do. And it's funny that you
Yeah.
say that. This child, his biggest complaint on the first morning when he couldn't get up before the sun came
Mhm.
up on the clock was he's going, Mama, the birds are awake. The birds are awake. And that's what he kept saying. He's 2.5. The birds. Like, why can't
Awesome.
I get up? But it's true. I mean, it's very hard to change our sleep cycles. And it can be done. That's sort of the exciting piece is that it can be done, and it is, believe it or not, easier for an adult to change for a child than for an adult to change for themselves when they are
Yeah.
self-implementing is very tricky.
No, I would agree with that. And
Yeah.
again, I really appreciate you taking the time today. Every time I hear you speak, I learn so much, and I have so much gratitude that there are people like you in the world that help people with these problems.
Thank you so much.
Because there are just so many parents in my life. And actually, when we're done here tonight, I know I usually just post it within this private group, and I am going to put it out publicly
Thank
because
you.
I do think this is just so important for parents to know right now, especially with what's been going on in the world, that there
Yeah,
is relief, and
that's what I've
it
been
can be
finding.
with relatively simple changes.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I've been finding is that, people just need that
Yeah.
relief valve somewhere. What something's got to give. And, again, it's sort of a very small in the grand scheme of things. Believe me, those first couple nights are exhausting.
Yeah.
It's a process. But in the grand scheme of things, 3 to 5 nights to, 7 nights, something like that for, you know, a lifetime of better sleep is really just it's worth it.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. Well, thank you so much again, Kelsey, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you coming. If anyone has any questions, we will put Kelsey's information when this gets posted so that you can reach out and contact her. And I am Sarah Gustafson with Janice Mitchell Real Estate. And if you happen to know of anyone looking to buy or sell in the Worcester County area, I would appreciate the opportunity to chat with them. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.